Thanks for listening to my talk. In the next few minutes, I'll be talking about racial microaggressions, which are less overt forms of racism. I'll explain highlights from an academic paper and share some personal experiences to help illustrate the concepts. The paper that first introduced me to racial microaggressions is this one, Racial Microaggressions in Everyday Life, by Daryl Wing-Sue and colleagues. In this paper, Dr. Sue defines microaggressions and further describes three main subtypes of microaggressions. He defines racial microaggressions as brief and common, daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental messages, which can be intentional or unintentional, that communicates something hostile, derogatory, or negative towards someone because of their race. Perpetrators of microaggressions are often unaware that they're being racist. The main points here are that racial microaggressions happen all the time. They are a form of racism, but they're often so subtle they go unnoticed or are not recognized as racist. Most of all, they can actually be well intended, and they generally are committed by people who think of themselves as good, moral, decent human beings. We need to care about them because anyone can commit them. They are pervasive in society and help perpetuate racism. The three main types of racial microaggressions are racial microassaults, racial microinsults, and racial microinvalidations. I'm going to explain each of these with brief examples and then move on to fuller stories from my own experiences to illustrate microaggressions more generally. Of the three kinds of racial microaggressions, racial microassaults are the most obviously racist. For example, I remember being called a little Chinese booger in kindergarten, having a boy tease me in 4th grade by bowing with clasped hands while saying sayonara, and being called a chink in high school. By comparison, racial microinsults are less direct. They have an underlying or hidden message that is racist or based on a stereotype, and are often not intentional. Sometimes are even meant as a compliment. For example, in elementary school, I once heard a boy in my class who was frustrated with math exclaim, "I wish I was Asian, because Asians are so smart." And when I moved to Central Oregon as an adult, a sales lady, after realizing I was new in town, asked me, "Are you going to get a job?" And at the doctor's and dentist's office, I was asked, "Are you in public assistance?" The third category is microinvalidation. These minimize, negate, or deny the identity, feelings, or reality of someone who's experienced racism. For example, people telling me, "You have such good English." Here they're assuming I'm a foreigner just because of how I look. And when we're hearing a lot of these days in response to Black Lives Matter is All Lives Matter. I want to point out a couple things about these microaggressions. Any of these microaggressions can be unintentional, even well-intended. And context really matters here. Many of these seem and could be actually completely innocuous without knowing the actual context. Now I'll describe a couple fuller stories from my own experiences. When I was a little girl, about 10 or 11 years old, I was walking down a sidewalk one afternoon. I was walking to meet my mom, where she agreed she would meet me a couple blocks away. I saw a boy, probably a few years older than I was, coming up the same sidewalk. I didn't recognize him, but it didn't bother me. I just kept walking. But as this boy got very close to me, he suddenly got right in my face. Ching chong, ching chong, ching chong, ching chong, ching chong, ching chong. As suddenly as this had happened, it was over, and he strode away as if nothing had happened. I was stunned and confused. When I saw my mom, I told her what had happened. She said, "Oh, he was probably just imitating something he saw on TV. Maybe he thinks that's the way we talk to each other." What I remember most was that I still felt uncomfortable. I knew she was trying to make me feel better, but I felt like she was trying to say I should let it go. Most of all, I felt like the discussion was closed. Now, an example of a more subtle racial microaggression that was a recurring event when I was growing up. For a while, I was the only one in my class who wasn't white. That's just how things were because I grew up in a small town. This was in upstate New York, Oneonta, New York, actually. And this is an actual picture from my kindergarten class. So the town was almost homogeneously white. I didn't actually feel like there was racism there, but I look back and I remember having to ask my mom as early as first grade what I was supposed to call myself because I got questions. People would ask me over and over, actually, throughout the years, "Where are you from?" To which I would say, "I'm from here." But people would follow that up with, "Oh, but where were you born?" "I was born in this town, in Oneonta." "Oh, what country are you from?" "I'm from here. I haven't lived anywhere else." And this could even be followed up further with, "Well, where is your family from?" The problem here isn't wanting to know my ethnic background. I'm I'm fine with that. It's actually nice if you want to get to know me in the appropriate context. The problem is the underlining message is that Asians are perpetual foreigners. What I mean is I noticed that white kids were not asked this question and black kids were not asked this question. Only Asian kids got asked this question in this manner. And it doesn't matter how long we've been here, if we're born here, and if our English is perfect. We're still seen as foreigners by many. Let me tell you what else was eye-opening for me about this. When I got into graduate school, I realized with amazement one day that we had an incredibly international student body. We had students from New Zealand, Togo, China, Uruguay, Guyana, Sri Lanka, Israel, the Netherlands, Russia, Venezuela. One day, though, I suddenly realized in my interactions with all these international students that if I encountered a white student, I expected them to be American until I found out otherwise, like their accent or something else gave it away. I also expected the black students to be American unless something else gave it away. But this is what got me. I expected Asians to be foreigners, not American, until I found out otherwise. I realized I shared that same bias that had caused me to feel rejected the entire time I was growing up. In conclusion, Racial microaggressions can take many forms and are insidious because they're often unconscious. No one is immune. We all have biases and unconscious biases. We have to be vigilant and self-monitor in order to uncover these biases because we all think we're good people. Unfortunately, this is hard to say, but sincerely caring is not enough because it doesn't do enough, and it can even do harm. Obviously, my mom wanted to protect me when I was a little girl. But did you catch the microaggressions in my story about the boy? The boy committed a racial microassault, clearly. But my mom, what she did was she minimized what had happened. And that was a micro-invalidation. The damage done was that I felt like I couldn't talk about it anymore after that. Please don't shut down the conversation. Make space to listen. What can you do? You can help. Learning more helps. Learn more about unconscious bias. Learn more about microaggressions. Look up Gerald Wing Sue. Honor the Black Lives Matter movement. Become a stronger ally by learning more, by listening, and by talking about race. Thank you so much for listening to my talk.